So Marvel, uh,
Okay.
people use the phrase "no problem" a lot. I think it's become uh, more and more the norm. It's kind of replaced "you're welcome." I think it's probably the most common reflex statement I hear in response to "thank you," um,
Hmm.
and I've heard this a while ago and it stuck with me that "no problem" was actually a somewhat rude thing to say in response to "thank you," and the rationale was that um, it's it's assuming that it basically implies that there was a problem to begin with, or at least that the other person who you're saying no problem to thought that there was a problem, which
Hmm.
isn't always the case and is often makes saying no problem inappropriate. So, for instance, if I was to say thank you to you for getting me a cup of water, and and you say no problem, it's like you're assuming that I thought there was a problem, and depending on the social context, there may have been I didn't think that there was a problem at all. I was just asking you to get me a drink of water, or you might be my waiter, or whatever. I mean, it's like there's all kinds of different reasons why there should be no problem even implied. And by saying no problem, you've then implied that there was a problem, that the other person felt bad about asking you to do something, when in many cases that's not the case and shouldn't be the case. Um,
Right.
so that's sort of what I want to start off with. What are your thoughts on that? And um, have you noticed that? Do you use no problem? Is I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely heard of no problem. And I've definitely used no problem. I didn't every time I talk to you, James, you always bring something new to the table, which is fantastic. I didn't when you were saying the fact that no problem in response to thank you could possibly mean that there was a problem. I didn't even think that way, but I have used no problem. I've used no problem in Skype. Like I think the terminology instead of saying no problem is NP. You've probably seen that before
Mm-hmm.
when people say, you do this. Oh, no problem, no problem. And I've definitely used it myself. But I also use you're welcome. So that hasn't totally left my vocabulary either. So if somebody says thank you, I say you're welcome, and vice versa. I myself don't consider as a major problem, or I didn't until you just said something, and I'll look more into it and things like that. But I have heard it, yes, and not just on the job, but even in my family. People, I think this is just a common
I think it's
terminology that
become
people are
incredibly
using.
common, yeah. And I think most people don't
People are,
think about it. It's obviously not intentional trying to be rude or anything, but I think that it, yeah.
I think people use it on a regular basis, but your welcome is still there as well. So your welcome hasn't really completely left the door yet. So.
Well, and I think here's something that I've considered. I think your welcome has to some degree lost its meaning, right? Your welcome is a phrase that literally doesn't quite fit in anymore. I mean, what does literally your welcome mean? I guess you are I see. I don't know. Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, what does that mean in response to thank you? I could figure it out, and we could look it up. But I think
Yeah.
really it's a phrase that somewhat lost its meaning. No
And that's
problem
no
though
problem either.
still has a meaning. Literally, we can figure out exactly what it means. And so,
Yeah.
regardless of what people intend when they say it, I think that there is this underlying meaning that's still there. That I think basically, I think it's just etiquette. Is the way I see it, where it's someone can miss a point of etiquette and still be a totally nice person, still not be
Right.
rude, but it's a good to know etiquette. And I think that no problem is a part of etiquette that's just not taught. That's overlooked, because I think saying no
Because I
problem
think,
it has a meaning that's just unintended, but it still is left just enough to make it something that people should avoid saying as a reflex statement. There is one time where it's very appropriate, and I'll get to that after you respond.
no, you're fine. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But when I think no problem is still kind of new, even though it is very popular. Because I didn't really. I'm trying to remember the time where I first started noticing no problem. And since it's so popular, it's kind of hard to realize that. But I still think it's kind of new. I don't think I really started using the term no problem until like maybe a year or so ago. And also, and I know you mentioned etiquette for no problem, but I think for me, and I'll say for me, when somebody says, "Oh, thank you so much," and I say no problem, I don't think that what they were doing was a problem. I'm just thinking on my end, it wasn't a problem, for example, to get you that cup of water. Oh, no problem. Or even I'll say, "Oh, it was no problem to get you that." So,
But
you know,
but but why would you even say that? Why would you say that it wasn't a problem? I mean, that's implying that there was a problem to begin with.
Not necessarily. It wasn't a problem on my end to get you a cup of water. Not saying you were had the problem with the water. You said, "Oh, thank you so much for giving me the water." Oh, it wasn't a problem to get you water. I'll do it again. Thank you so much. Something like that. It doesn't mean that you had the problem.
Well,
In
no,
my
but it implies that I thought that there was a problem. If you say no
not
problem to
necessarily.
me, oh, that's what it implies. That's what the words imply. I'm not. I know that's not what you necessarily mean, but I think that
No,
that's
no,
what.
because that's why I add the, oh, it was no problem to me at all. I'll do it again for you. Oh, it was no problem at all again. I
But you're
can do it
still
later.
even
Stuff
saying
like
to
that.
me, you're still implying that I thought it was a problem to you. I mean, that's still the implication.
Hmm.
There's
And
still.
well, explain that because I understand where you're coming from, but again, when I do it, like I said, when I do it, I'm not thinking, oh, James had a problem. He couldn't get his
Well, and
own
that's
water.
what I'm
No,
saying. I
I'm
don't
saying
think
it's
that
not
it's
a problem.
intentional. It's etiquette. It's not
Okay.
something that people think about, but it's something that's worth thinking about. So here's let me explain better. Okay. Um, so like for something in work, there are times
Right.
where I'll thank someone for doing a task, and it may have been a task that's totally part of their job, something that they should have been doing anyway. Um,
Yeah.
this happens. We all do it. And
Yeah.
I'll be like, yeah, thanks for getting that done, and they'll say, oh, no problem. Um, and and in my mind, and I've thought about this a lot more than some people in the sense that maybe I've overthought about it. But I'm thinking, well, I didn't think that it was a problem. So why did you need to tell me that it wasn't a problem? I never assumed that it was a problem. In fact, I assumed that you should be doing it anyway. I mean, it's still worth thanking someone for. But when someone says no problem, it implies that they know what I'm thinking, that they think that it basically it turns the phrase thank you into the phrase sorry, because where no problem is very appropriate is when someone apologizes. When someone apologizes to you, you say, oh, it was no problem, or no worries, or something like that, to say you don't need to worry about it. You don't even need to apologize. It wasn't a problem to begin with. Because when someone apologizes, they're telling you, I think this is a problem. You tell me either that it is and accept my apology, or tell me that it's not a problem. That's the social context when someone apologizes. But when someone says thank you, why would you use the exact same phrase? Why would you tell them, I think that you're apologizing by saying thank you? And that's basically what responding with no problem is doing. It's saying, I'm treating your thank you as an apology. And sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes that's the implication. Someone says, thanks for doing that. And maybe something else kind of implies that they're actually also apologizing. But if they're not, but that's what happens. You're turning a thank you into an apology when you respond with no problem, because no problem is appropriate for an apology, but not appropriate for thank you. Have I made my case better?
I think you have. I think you have. But I think I've still kept my peace when I say no problem. Like I said, and I know everything you said, that sounds great. It sounds awesome. Your case has been made. But I'm still thinking in the perspective of, again, your cup of water. Hey, man, I don't mind giving it to you. It's not a problem. So and that's another thing. People use different phrases. So they might use no problem. I might say it's not, I don't mind. Or I might say you're welcome. I might use those phrases, intertwined together. It doesn't, and I know what you're saying unintentionally. I
Well,
don't
and
think of it as,
there is a point there in the sense that the phrase is used differently. It's not a
right.
problem, no worries. At one point, I thought that those were all the same. I'm actually not convinced anymore. And a good friend of mine, he's a linguistic student, and he mentioned the fact that when someone says no problem versus oh it's not a problem, there is actually a
Right.
difference there. And I'm thinking, well, in meaning there isn't, but in the sense that one is not a sentence and one is actually a complete sentence, the
Exactly.
extra time it takes to fill in the sentence actually it kind of implies that they put more thought into their response. I think that's why people do it, to make it seem more genuine. They add more words. They make a complete sentence because it shows that it wasn't just a reflex. It takes
Yeah.
away some of the
But I
reflex aspect of it.
linguist, kind of similar to like, you probably heard the statement, oh, love you. And then I love you.
They mean
You see,
different things.
something.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I agree with your
That's
friend.
interesting.
Very,
So I think, yeah, and that's something I hadn't considered before. So I agree. But the meaning behind the words "no problem" and or "it's not a problem," there's still you're taking the thank you and turning it into an apology. Now, my argument is that it doesn't matter what you're trying to do or what you think on your end or how pure your intentions are, because and I'm not putting blame on anyone who says no problem. I just think that recognizing the hidden meaning whether it was hidden to you or hidden to other people, whether it's hidden to the person that you're talking to.
Right.
I think once you see that hidden meaning, I think that should change how you speak. I mean, it changed how I speak, and so I try not to use the phrase "no problem" unless I am responding to an apology. And that's why I call it etiquette, because it's not something that you should ever blame someone who doesn't know, whether the fork goes on the
Right.
left hand side or whatever. I don't remember where the fork goes, but the person who has the fork on the wrong side, and you don't think badly of them for doing that. You just think, okay, I should teach them, and then once they learn where it should go, then you kind of expect them to do that in the future. And I'm not saying that I expect you to use my thoughts on this,
No,
but I'm just saying, like, that's how I think of it. I think of it as etiquette, where it's not like I would blame anyone for using it inappropriately, but I think it's worth making the case that it is inappropriate to use it in response to thank you. Does that make sense?
no, that makes perfect sense. So my thing, what will you be saying in the future? Because I just go back to my "you're welcome." Like I said, I use different terminologies, but what will you do in the future?
So
If I,
I say my pleasure a lot.
okay. Okay.
That's become more and more my reflex, and I think that as good as, I mean, whenever it becomes a reflex, it starts to lose meaning, which is sad. But my pleasure has as good an underlying meaning as I can imagine for a reflex statement to thank you. When someone thanks you and you say, "Oh, it was my pleasure to do it," or just respond with "my pleasure," which is the implied meaning is that was my pleasure to do it. That's I think that that's a great statement about your work ethic, about your attitude towards work, your attitude towards serving people, whatever. I just think that that's about as good as it gets in terms of a reflex statement. You're welcome is also appropriate, or absolutely, or something like that. I'll use all of those. Pretty much anything, but no problem. No problem, no worries. Those don't happen unless there's an apology happening, or
Yeah.
unless someone is clearly indicating that they're sorry, even though they're saying thank you. You can tell that they're actually apologizing. Then I might use it, but in general, it's and even really if they don't say it, then I wouldn't want to imply that they are apologizing. So I just say my pleasure, you're welcome, absolutely, any one of those, something like that. My pleasure is my favorite. I just think that it's hard to go wrong with that, and I think it says something very positive about your attitude towards work.
Okay. Fantastic.
All right, well, those are my thoughts. Thanks for talking about this with me. I know
I'll
it's
learn
not a
something.
typical conversation, but I think that it's important.
Yeah, I had a feeling this whole segment wasn't going to be a typical conversation, but it's awesome. I love learning. I love
Thanks so much,
learning.
Michael. I appreciate it.